The LegalFuel Speaker Series, Better Lawyer, Better You. LegalFuel is the practice resource center of the Florida Bar and a benefit to Florida Bar members. This ongoing speaker series will feature seasoned leaders from Florida's legal community who represent a wide spectrum of legal expertise and practice. With a focus on the fundamentals of today's legal practice, topics include finance, technology, human resources, marketing, client development, and day-to-day operations of your law firm. The LegalFuel Speaker Series is brought to you by Florida Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company. Florida Lawyers Mutual, defending the reputations of Florida attorneys since 1989. Go to flmic.com to learn more about the company created by lawyers for lawyers. We are now proud to present you the following.
Hello everyone, my name is Valerie Barnhart and this is a Florida Bar LegalFuel Speaker Series presentation. Today we are going to talk about making the jump. This is going to be a step-by-step guide on how to launch your own law firm. A little background on me, I've been practicing law for about 8 years in Broward County, Florida. About a year ago, I started my own law firm with a law partner after spending 6 years at a mid-sized law firm of about 120 lawyers. When I decided to start my law firm, it was a scary proposition. There was so much I didn't know, and I'm here to walk you through the main things that you need to think about and the steps that you can consider when you decide to make the jump. The first thing that you need to do before starting your own law firm, and this may seem so obvious, is actually making the decision. Somebody like me, my personality, I worry about what I'm going to worry about next. And like I mentioned, I always knew in my heart that I wanted to start my own law firm. It was just all about making the decision to actually do it and leaving the comfort of a firm that I had been at so long, was secure at, they treated me well. So in making that decision, that is your first step. Once you make that decision, there are so many things that you don't realize you need to think about. Advertising rules, how to form your firm. Do you need office space? Can you afford staff? How do you know when to hire staff? How do you open a trust account? So what we're going to do today is go through all of the things that I didn't know that I now know and tell you tips and tricks and things that I would have done differently, and hopefully that will help you on your journey. All right, so step one, let's talk about choosing an entity and how to know which one is right for you. So my law firm, it's myself and my law partner, and the way that we set up our firm is a PA or a professional association, which we'll talk about in a moment. A little background on my practice area, I practice primarily in the areas of business law and labor and employment. So if you are in a practice area that doesn't deal with any sort of corporate or business background, it can be pretty hard and overwhelming to know which is the best option for you. And if you take a look at the slide on the screen, there are numerous options that the Florida Bar permits you to practice law under in terms of type of entity. You've got sole proprietorships, limited liability partnerships, professional associations, which is the entity structure that my firm has, and PLLCs. So how do you know which is the right entity for you? Thankfully, the Florida Bar Legal Resource website has a wealth of information on how to choose the right entity for you, the pros and cons for each, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about now. So the three primary things that you need to think about when choosing an entity are liability, taxation, and corporate formalities. So, for example, as a business attorney, I would never recommend to my clients or another lawyer to start any type of business, including a law firm, as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And the reason that is you do not have the corporate shield from liability with those types of entities. The second thing you need to think about in choosing your entity structure is how the entity is going to be taxed. So my partner and I, we are a two-owner PA, which is a corporation. We have the ability to elect S corporation tax treatment, which for us makes sense because it gives us some tax benefits. Now, that's not necessarily available in other types of entity structures, so go to the legal resource page for LegalFuel and you can read more about taxation for these types of entities and the pros and cons and what's right for you. The third thing is corporate formalities, which you'll see on the slide here. And what that means is, depending on the type of entity that you choose, do you have the necessary corporate paperwork that you need? So I don't know, for all of you who are watching, how long it's been since you took business entities in law school, but it's an important thing to make sure, depending on the structure that you choose, that you have those formalities in place. Otherwise, as we all remember, that can absolutely affect your individual liability as one of the owners. So what's the takeaway here? The type of entity you choose for your brand new firm is a big decision. And like I said, fortunately for you, the Florida Bar LegalFuel Resource has a wealth of information for you to research what is the right option for you and your new firm. Okay, so now that you've chosen what entity you're going to use for your new firm, what's the next thing? You've got to pick the firm name. So the name of my law firm is Pereira Barnhart. As you may have guessed, my law partner's last name is Pereira, so we get 0 points for creativity. However, when we chose our firm name, the thought process was we really want branding and name recognition, and we want to build a legacy. So that's why we decided to use our last names, which is a common thing with Florida law firms, but you are not stuck with just having your last name as the law firm name. So one thing that you need to think about that I think is probably not obvious to a lot of people, and it wasn't to me, is how many rules the Florida Bar has to make sure that your law firm name is compliant with the rules regulating the Florida Bar. So if you take a look at the slide, one thing that I would suggest is you go to the selecting a firm name on the LegalFuel Resource page, and that is going to give you a rundown of the various ethics opinions relating to how to name your law firm. And I would make sure that you review that before selecting your perfect law firm name to make sure that it's going to be compliant, because there's a lot of things that you may not consider. For example, if a lawyer is going to use a trade name, you need to make sure it's not going to be perceived by the bar as deceptive. Also, if you wanted to name your firm Barnhart Legal Clinic or Legal Services, there are certain requirements that you have to be cognizant of. So for example, the opinions from the bar have shown that if you're going to use Legal Clinic or Legal Services, your hourly rates need to be less than the prevailing rate in your area. So that's going to be very geographically dependent. So these are all little tips and tricks and things that most of us wouldn't think of when we're starting this new law firm and picking the name, but they're things to be cognizant of. So what's in a name? Another thing that you should consider when selecting your name is the Florida Bar's Standing Committee on Advertising rules. One of the things that I was never aware of until I started the process of opening my own firm is that as a law firm, you are prohibited from using an abbreviated version of your full name in advertising if you're using the full law firm name on your letterhead, business cards, and other ads. So be very cognizant of the Florida Bar's advertising rules when you're starting your firm, choosing your name, and advertising your new firm. A few other practical tips that may not cross your mind when starting your new firm, and that a lot of new business owners miss, is that you're likely going to need a federal employer ID number or an EIN. The banks are going to require this to open your bank account if you have employees. It's certainly something that you need. And depending geographically where you're located, you're also going to need potentially additional state or local licensing requirements are met. So for example, we are in Broward County, Florida, in the city of Davie. And two of the things that we had to address was, number one, we needed an occupational license. Separately, we had to get inspections and certificates by the city fire inspector's office when we rented our office. So those are additional things opening your law firm that may not be top of mind, but that you definitely need to think about. So the next big step, step 2, let's talk about office space, whether you need it, whether you don't, and the pros and cons. So a little background on when I started my firm in January of 2018, my partner and I found a single office in an executive suite space, and it was the two of us literally back to back our desks, and we used that space for probably about 6 months. We learned a lot more than we probably ever wanted to know about one another, but it helped us in really getting in and growing our firm. And one of the main reasons we did that is because we've always thought lean and mean. And you'll hear me say that over and over again. You want to keep overhead as low as you can for as long as you can, because at the end of the day, you have to make the distinction between practicing law and running a business. And a law firm is a business. So the first option when you're thinking about whether or not you need a space is, do you rent an office? So there's a couple of pros and cons to this. Number one, depending on, I think, really your practice area, is it's a pro that you have a location where you can meet clients. Now, I'll tell you, for a number of years, there were clients who I've represented for a long time that I had never actually met in person until recently. So I don't think, as a lawyer starting your own law firm right from the beginning, that having a physical space is a necessity. But again, depending on your practice area, if you do a lot of client-facing stuff, so for example, real estate closings, or you're in a practice area like wills and trusts where you need a space for your clients to come in, those will be different considerations. Another option would be like what my partner and I did, having an executive suite, because a lot of times that's helpful in that you get a space, it's not very expensive, and they have a lot of amenities where you can use them to your advantage, such as conference rooms, a receptionist, so on and so forth. Another pro to renting office space is that it may lend a certain level of credibility to your practice. And again, I think this is highly dependent on the type of practice that you have and the type of clients that you have. Also, it can be way more affordable, initially at least, than buying an office space, and it allows you more flexibility, because depending on the growth of your practice or where you're at in life, if you wanted to scale back, it affords you the option to be flexible and can expand and contract as your practice does. So I'll give you one personal example. When we decided to look for new space, just wanting to get out of that tiny little office the two of us were sharing together, an option that we considered was buying an office. And there was an office that we looked at. Geographically, it was in the right spot. It was a good price. We both loved it. But I'm so fortunate that we decided not to buy that office, because the problem would have been that we outgrew that space within about 6 months, and then we would have turned into landlords. So again, I think that just highlights that renting is an affordable option that you can work with as your practice continues and grows. Just like anything in life, there are pros and cons to any decision that you have to make. So let's talk about some of the cons in deciding whether to rent an office space. Let's go back to lean and mean and keeping your overhead as low as possible. So rental expense, that's going to be, aside from compensation or salary, the biggest chunk of your overhead that you likely have. And it's also similar to renting an apartment versus owning a house. You're going to be more restricted in the space that you have in terms of making any modifications or decorating, which may seem like small things, but it may be important to you if you're in the space long term. Also, too, one of the things that we realized when we were deciding to rent office space is commercial landlords tend to not be overly willing to negotiate on terms. Generally, they want to lock you into a 3 to 5 year term, which to me honestly was terrifying, because I don't want to be committed really to anything other than my husband for that period of time. So it's something that you have to think about, because over the course of your firm, if you're growing, you may outgrow that space and not be able to get out of that lease. And I'll give you a little example that I have. So currently the space that we are in is 2 offices joined together. That's about 500 or 600 square feet. Now in our office, in that 500 square foot space, we've got 4 lawyers and a legal assistant. So again, you notice the theme with us, it's tight to say the least. We are actually, as I film this, getting ready to move into a new office space which is 1,500 square feet. Everyone will have their own office, but very scary, it's 3 times what we're paying. So that is a decision that we thought long and hard about, but what we were able to negotiate was a single year term. And that was amazing for us because it gives us the flexibility, depending on the growth and where our firm goes, to make different decisions on space that suits us in a year. So another option for your practice and to keep costs low is you can share space with another attorney. And again, just like everything, there's pros and cons to this as well. So some of the pros, if you look at the screen, obviously having other attorneys around to bounce ideas off of, this would probably be the biggest pro if I were considering it now to start my own law firm, because I don't know what I would have done if when I started my firm that I did it completely on my own. I've been very fortunate to have a law partner to bounce ideas off of, to cover hearings for me, to strategize with. So that is totally a pro for me. Also with sharing space, depending on the other attorneys in the office, there's the ability for business generation and to receive referrals from them. So that's also a positive. I sort of compare this to when we started our firm and had the executive space. We are in an executive suite with a lot of other lawyers and small businesses around us that rent their own space. But I can tell you that we've gotten many, many client referrals from the attorneys that were in the initial building that we were in. And also some of our non-lawyer neighbors in that building have become clients of ours. So that's definitely one option to think about. It's obviously more cost effective and it's less commitment because a lot of times you're able to negotiate shorter terms when you're sharing space. And again, similar to the executive suite, it gives you some access to professional facilities. So if you need a conference room for a deposition or to meet a potential client, if you need a receptionist to answer your phones, those are all pros in sharing space. So you're getting the office rental experience without the high level of commitment or the high cost. So let's talk about the cons in sharing space. A lot of the cons are similar to renting, right? You're committed for a certain term. There's a cost that's involved with it. But I think what's most important that a lot of us may not think of is the ethical rules that go along with sharing space. So for example, one of the bar ethical opinions, and you'll see a reference to it on the slide on your screen, is that it is improper if attorneys are sharing space to hold themselves out as a partnership or when they're not partners. And you need to be very careful too, just from a business perspective, is it giving the appearance that you and the person or persons that you're sharing office space with are partners, particularly if you're sharing assistants or secretaries or those sorts of things. So that's something that you need to be cognizant about and very careful about. Also too, depending on how you best function and work, you may not enjoy having office neighbors in the same office depending on those personalities. And another thing you have to think about is if you're going to make the decision to share space, my recommendation would be share space with lawyers who don't do the same thing as you, because that gives you the opportunity to send referrals back and forth, and it'll avoid, hopefully, any conflicts. Because if you're practicing in the same area, for example, family law or commercial litigation, there's the potential that there could be a conflict if you end up adverse to each other or with clients on opposite sides of a case. So let's talk about option 3, going virtual. Virtual law firms are all the buzz right now, and really to me what going virtual means is leveraging technology so you don't have to have a regular brick and mortar office that you're at from 9 to 5, or let's be realistic, 9 to 8 when you're running a business. The obvious pros are there's no rental expense, so that's not going to be part of your overhead. Possibly there's tax advantages to you because you can take a home office deduction if you own your own home. There's also no commute, which depending where you're at in the state of Florida is a huge sell. And if you are self-directed and don't need a lot of structure, it also may help you get more work done when you don't have office distractions. And obviously there's lower startup cost. I'll tell you there's a number of groups that I am in for lawyers and female lawyers, and some of the attorneys in those groups One day I want to be like them because they have taken their brick and mortar offices and gone completely virtual. And when I see them posting on Facebook that they're living abroad for the summer in Bali or Mexico or some other fabulous location and just running their practice from there, that would be an amazing outcome. It's not something that I can do right now. And I think if you're considering really building your dream practice, and that's a goal for you, and being able to be virtual, you've also got to think about your practice area, particularly if you're a solo lawyer, because if you're in a litigation role, then you need to make sure you have people, if you're not able to get back to Florida, if you're out of state, to cover hearings, depositions. It makes coordinating, I think, a little harder, but it's definitely doable. So now we've talked about the various options in choosing or not choosing whether to have office space. There are a lot of other factors that go into it. And if you take a look at your screen, this is just a snapshot of all of the various resources that the Florida Bar LegalFuel website has, tips and tricks in helping you make the decision. There are articles, podcasts, videos that can help you in making what is one of the biggest decisions in starting your law firm. Now, also another thing to think about is if you go with the renting or buying option and you're going to have a brick and mortar office, think about how you're going to fill that office. So it was very similar renting our space to when I bought a house. You never realize how much stuff you need until you're in that situation. So one of the things that we did is we got a lot of our furniture initially on websites like OfferUp, and it's actually really nice furniture that we got for a good price. The phones, computers, office equipment, things like that, my recommendation would be to go to a discount store like Costco, because we have a business account with them and it has saved us a lot of money over the past year, and things we need to buy like computers, phones, even office paper. So you want to save the money wherever you can. So now you've chosen your entity structure, you've got an awesome firm name, and you have an office or you don't. The next step is hopefully you're at a point where you have enough business that you're able to hire staff to help you. Even if it's just a virtual paralegal or even a full-time legal assistant, what are some of the things that you need to think about, and how do you know that you need staff? So for me personally, this was a very scary experience, right? When we started our law firm, it started off and it was great, and it's still going great. But hiring staff is a huge investment in terms of your overhead and operating costs. So how do you know when it's time to make that decision? Because when we started, my partner and I, we were the lawyers, we were the marketers, we were the HR department, we were the ones doing client intake, the accounting, so on and so forth. So you've got to think about when it comes to a point that you are doing essentially a lot of administrative stuff, so much to the point that the bulk of your time is not being spent on either practicing law or business development. That's when it's time to think about hiring staff. So my partner and I, when we sort of figured out it was time that we needed help, and we were fortunate to find great help, was the bulk of our day was doing potential client intake. So as I mentioned before, the primary areas of practice that we do are business law and labor and employment. And on the employment side, we do plaintiff and defense work. But a lot of times when we get referrals for those sorts of calls, it's obviously a very distressing and often emotional situation that we're dealing with. So with us handling the intake, we realized per call we were spending a good 30 minutes on the phone. So we were happy to do that, and we were happy that we were getting the calls, but it came to a point where we needed someone specifically dedicated to that task, so we were able to spend our time doing business development and getting the actual work done. So you've made the decision to hire someone, and you need to know where to look. So the obvious options are Craigslist, Indeed, job websites like that. I'll tell you the problem that we had with those sorts of websites is we got so many applications, and it was just really a task to try and wade through all of those to try and find people that would be the right fit. And part of that was our fault because we should have been more descriptive in really laying out the perfect hire for us. The legal assistant paralegal that we have now, who's amazing, I actually got her as a referral from one of my friends. So I have a lawyer friend of mine who I mentioned, we're having a really tough time trying to find a legal assistant. We just haven't met the right fit. And she had actually just gone through the hiring process for a legal assistant, and she narrowed it down to her top 3. And she's like, hey, do you want me to send you the information on the other 2 who I really loved, but not the ones that I made the offer to? And that just worked out perfectly for us because her judgment is good. It was a great fit, and she's been with us for the past 6 months and is doing a fantastic job. One thing that we've actually never put into place, but I've heard a lot of lawyers that I know do, are what's called working interviews. So what they'll do is have an applicant come in for an interview, particularly the staff with the paralegals or secretaries, legal assistants, and have them do a working interview by asking them to complete a task or answering the phones for 15 minutes to see how they do with client-facing interaction, those sorts of things. So I think that's actually a great idea, and you really get a sense for how someone performs under pressure, because let's be honest, most law firms are high pressure environments, and you need to know someone's going to be the right fit. Another thing I would think about is if you're going to use an online hiring resource, whether it be LinkedIn, I think, which is a great option, Indeed, Craigslist, those sorts of things, learn from our mistake and be incredibly specific on who your dream applicant would be and what the job is going to involve. Because if you're the only one sifting through the resumes, it's going to be tough for you to find the needle in the haystack and find the good resume amongst 100 fitting who you're really looking for. Obviously, hiring staff is scary because it's a big responsibility. You're responsible for someone else and their salary and their livelihood, so it's a lot of pressure on you. But I think you really need to think about running your firm as a business, and if you can delegate the administrative tasks so you can focus on client development and doing the work, it's a net win for you. I think another important thing too, and this is just background experience and practicing in employment law, is the practice of law can be very stressful. So I think it's really important to have a good firm culture. And that's something that my partner and I really wanted to focus on when we started our law firm. Obviously, it's a business, but we really wanted a firm culture that was like a family environment, that we could build a legacy and people enjoy coming to work. So some of the perks that we put into place is, for example, we'll do team lunches every month. If it's a staff member's or another lawyer's birthday, we celebrate that, we acknowledge it. And we also try and acknowledge the little wins, not just for the attorneys, but for the staff members, because we're all part of one cohesive whole, and without one of us, the firm wouldn't work the way that it does. Okay, so let's recap. Hiring your first staff member is a huge thing to celebrate, but it's also a scary thing. So how do you know when the right time for you is? And keep in mind, the first thing that I would say to you is run the numbers. I am very much a type A personality, which is probably true of a lot of lawyers, but I am someone who loves to plan and have detail. I still use a day planner. And one of the things when we made the decision to hire was, okay, we need to run the numbers, because if we hire someone at X hourly pay or a salary, depending on what the position is it going to be a net benefit in terms of us being able to do more legal work and those sorts of things. Also, from an affordability standpoint, that's obviously the most important. If you're unable to hire someone full-time, there are a lot of other great options that I know used by a lot of lawyers that I know. So for example, virtual assistants, virtual personal assistants, virtual paralegals, and that gives you the opportunity to have help without really fully committing to bringing a full-time person on. And then when you have the ability to do that, you can make the transition into hiring a full-time staff member. Know the type of person you're looking for. Be incredibly specific on what you need them to do as far as their job description, because that's going to help you narrow the search for the person that you're looking for. And what worked for me Tell your network that you're looking to hire and the type of person you're looking for. Because if I didn't do that, we wouldn't have the incredible legal assistant that we do. I think it's also important as your firm and your practice gets busier is when you have a staff, you have to make time to train them because they're not going to know everything. They're not going to know how you like things done. I think that's a growing process. And give them performance evaluations because I think it's very easy as lawyers and as humans to get so caught up in the day-to-day of running a new business that you don't take time to give constructive feedback to your staff. And lastly, create a positive firm culture. So now that we've talked about how to know when to hire your first staff member, I want to point you in the direction of some of the resources that the Florida Bar LegalFuel has available, and you'll see them on your screen, because there are way more considerations in employing someone, like when to fire them if they're not working out, or tips on automating your practice that are unfortunately beyond the scope of this video. So check out the resources on the page as you're getting ready to hire your first staff member because they will undoubtedly be helpful for you. Okay, so now you have your firm, you have your office space, you're up and running. The next, well, probably the most important thing when you have a firm is how do you generate business? Where do you get clients? So a little background on when we started, like I mentioned, prior to opening my own firm with my partner, I was at a mid-sized firm for about 6 years, and they were great to me. They always allowed me opportunities to go out and network and be involved with the Florida Bar, and that was really my starting point for my career. And during that time in that networking, I was able to build a book of business. It was no $1 million book of business, unfortunately, but I had the fortune of starting a law firm when I already had some clients. So if you are starting from scratch and you don't have a book of business or any clients, it's obviously super important to focus on where you're going to get your business from. So some of the things we're going to talk about are advertising, lawyer referral services, referrals from people that you know, so on and so forth. And if you check out your screen, I've snapshotted a few of the resources available on LegalFuel to point you in the right direction in getting your first client. Okay, so let's talk about tip number 1 in generating business. I think the easiest way for me to explain this is to stay in your lane, or don't be the jack of all trades. Niches lead to riches, and you want to have an area or areas of focus and expertise to really build your brand and market yourself and your firm. So again, I do primarily business law and labor and employment. When we started our firm, I had a decent sized book of business, but how I've generated that, and I'll talk about this a little more in a moment, is through lawyer referrals and my involvement in the Florida Bar and my local bar association. But I think staying in a certain area of practice, you are able to build a reputation as the go-to person for that area of practice. So that's super important. Another thing, tip 2 that I would think about is figure out who are your ideal clients, because until you know who those people are, and it's actually a harder question to answer than you would think, then you don't know how to find them. So that's another thing. One, as a side note, thing that I did when we started our firm is we did announcements. So it's an investment, true, and you want to be as frugal as you can for as long as you can, but it costs us probably, with mailing the stamps, about $300 or so. And we had really nicely done announcements that I just made a list of every lawyer I knew and all of my friends, and I sent them out. And I got so much positive feedback from that. And it's just a little step that allows you to be kept in people's mind, because you want everyone to know what you're doing. Because I think as humans, we want to help each other out. So if people know that you just hung your own shingle, they're going to want to help you. So make sure that they know about it. So let's talk about now, how do you get those clients? I think one of the most obvious is referrals, whether that be from other lawyers or people in your network that you know. And one thing I want to point out here from personal experience is if you're not starting already with a book of business, just recognize that it takes time to build those referral sources. And really the best way to do that is to do good work, be professional, guard your reputation, and any clients that you have referred to you, make sure you let the people referring those clients know that the case had a good outcome or the client is happy, because that's really the way to build your reputation. And don't get frustrated if it's taking longer than you think. And I'll give you an example. At my prior firm, like I mentioned, I was there for 6 years. And I worked so hard at marketing and networking and being involved. And at some points I would get discouraged because I felt like I was investing all of this personal time that I had into marketing and going to events, and as a young lawyer trying to build a book and generate business. And it really just wasn't blossoming into what I expected I would get out of it. But keep in mind, when I decided to make the jump and start my own firm, it was really like all those seeds I had planted just came to fruition. So I think it's so important to stick with it and just make sure that you're doing good work, you have a good reputation, and you have good people skills, obviously. Because I remember one of my mentors said to me, you could be the absolute best lawyer in the world, but if you can't generate business, you're not going to be able to sustain a law firm. Another option is get involved in your local bar association. So there are bar associations statewide. I am fortunate to be in the second largest county in the state, in Broward County. I'm very involved in the Broward County Bar Association. They have a lot of lawyer networking events. So those are super helpful because you'll meet some of your colleagues who don't do things that you do. The Florida Bar and other bar associations, I know the Broward County Bar has one as well, have lawyer referral services that you can sign up for. And that makes it easier for potential clients to contact you because they put potential clients in touch with lawyers who are registered through the referral service together to see if it's a good match. So let's talk about some other options for generating business. One of them would be advertisements in print, television, billboards, things like that. So I think realistically, unless you're a PI lawyer that does injury work or have a really big budget, these may be outside the grasp of someone just starting their law firm. It's not something that we've personally invested in. I think it's a big investment and you really got to have the financial backing to be able to do that. But one of the options that is really open to pretty much everyone in lower cost is getting involved in civic or business groups. So you have things like the Chamber of Commerce, BNI, the Rotary Club, those sorts of things. So that generally requires an annual membership fee, and then you're paying for the meetings that you attend. Also too, if you are focusing on your niche and only practicing in a certain area or limited areas of law, I would recommend find local industry groups that relate to the clients that you're looking for. So for example, if you're in the hospitality industry, if you're in the restaurant business, those are just some options where you can find a lot of local trade groups that you can get involved in and build your reputation. One thing from personal experience I will say is don't try and do everything all at once, because I found myself some years back when I was networking, I was going to so many events with so many groups where I really didn't have the opportunity to pick one or two and dedicate a lot of time to them. Because people in those groups, they're going to give you their business or send you business if they like you and they trust you. And I think it's really hard to build a trusting relationship or for someone to get a sense of who you are if you're only going to certain events and it's almost like speed dating. You meet one person, hand them your card, then you're moving on to the next. If you're involved in some of these civic and business groups, it really gives you an opportunity to get involved in the leadership or see the same people over and over again, and they get to know you, your personality, and your reputation, and then eventually you're going to be the one that comes to their mind if there's a referral that they have or if there's help that they need in a specific area. And I think the last thing, which is probably the most obvious, is social media. So as a precaution, I will tell you, look at the bar's advertising rules. And I would recommend, there's another video in the LegalFuel speaker series by Ethan Wall, who is the social media guru, that I would recommend that you watch, because I think it's very hard to have a practice nowadays and not have social media for your firm or just for you to be involved, but make sure that you're avoiding certain pitfalls. So another thing that I would recommend is taking a look at the Florida Bar guidelines for social networking, because you don't want to have advertising or social media activity that's not in compliance with bar guidelines. So business generation as it relates to social media, I'm involved in a number of lawyer networking groups on Facebook, which have been amazing for me. A lot of people in those groups, they're there to really support each other, but also to send business back and forth. Also to LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. We have a website presence. So those are some things to think about with social media, and we have gotten business from that. And a couple other takeaways just to think about when you're starting your own firm. Number one, don't lose sight of the fact that you, as a business owner and having your own law firm, get to choose who you work with. Identify who those people are and then take the steps that we just talked about to make it happen. Number two, track your marketing activities, because at certain intervals, you're going to want to look back and see what worked and what didn't work. And then track where your clients come from, because you want to be able to see if there's a certain person or lawyer or source that a good chunk of your clients come from. And if they're referral sources or people you know, you want to make sure that you're acknowledging that with a thank you. Lastly, consistency is key. Don't forget, business development is a long game. It's not going to happen overnight, so just be consistent, choose what activities suit you, and make sure that you're being consistent with them, tracking it, and the business will come. So now that you found the clients and the money is coming in, let's talk about finances, and more importantly, trust accounts. So for me, I am a rule follower, and having a trust account was probably the scariest part of opening a firm, because there are a lot of rules you need to know. So before you even start your firm, I would recommend that you read Chapter 5 of the rules regulating the Florida Bar. That would be, if I were you, where I start. And if there's one topic that you're going to come back to again and again, make it this one. I don't know specifically the statistics, but with lawyer discipline, I know trust accounting violations, whether they're intentional or not, are high on the list of lawyer discipline. So the process for us when we opened our firm, we worked with a business banker at Bank of America. Obviously Chase and the other big banks are going to have business bankers. And they took us through the process. It was someone knowledgeable that had worked with lawyers before and made sure that we filled out all the required forms. So if you don't know, when you're opening a trust account, there are a few forms that you've got to take care of right from the get-go. So the notice to eligible institution form, the bank notification letter, and the notice to the Bar Foundation. I had no idea about any of this before I started my own law firm, because obviously I had the luxury of working at a bigger firm where all of this was handled by a separate accounting department. Another takeaway is, again, when you start your firm, you are the jack of all trades. You're accounting, you're HR, you're the lawyer, you're the intake specialist, but make it a habit to reconcile your trust account every single month, because that's something that you should be doing, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. So since you're going to take my advice and revisit the trust account area again and again and again, I want to make sure I point you in the direction of some of the many resources that the Florida Bar has on the LegalFuel website. Trust accounting, podcasts and articles on whether you can keep canceled trust account checks, what do you do with client trust funds, how do you reconcile your account, is there a minimum account balance that you need? So take a look at the slide on your screen, and that just gives you a snapshot of some of the many resources available that I would recommend that you absolutely take a look at before opening your trust account. All right, so last but not least, let's talk about technology. You can't run a law practice today without technology, and that comes in many forms. So with starting your practice, and if you take a look at the screen, this highlights some of the things. One thing that you need to think about is cybersecurity. So as lawyers, we obviously have an ethical obligation to make sure that confidential client data is kept secure. And this is a topic that we could probably do an 8-hour CLE on. because there's so many factors that go into it. And it's also something you need to stay on top of, because running your own firm, a lot of times you're setting up your internet connection, your computer, those sorts of things yourself. So you need to make sure that you're securing those devices and your mobile devices. My recommendation would be hire an IT professional who knows how to do that. Obviously, it's a startup expense, but it's a great investment and something that you should be thinking about from the day that you opened your law firm. So also with technology, one of the biggest decisions that we made was practice management software. So again, both of us having bigger firm backgrounds, this was already chosen for us. So we really didn't know where to start. I know that on the Florida Bar website and the member benefits page, there are a lot of options, such as Clio, MyCase, Practice Panther. The LegalFuel website also has information on these options. But really what you want to think about is make sure that it's scalable, because what you need when you first start and what you may need a year down the road, you don't want to have to go through the process of having to migrate all of your information into a new software depending on the level of your practice. So what you're looking for in practice management software, and what we looked for, is obviously something that is going to track your time and expenses, something where you can keep client matter information, including the ability to conflict check when you get new clients, and manage documents. Another component of legal technology to think about when starting your own law firm is legal research. So this is another area where I was spoiled being at a bigger firm prior to starting my own law firm, because I had absolutely zero idea how expensive research platforms could be, particularly the ones we're most familiar with and are more popular. Now, I want to make a note that when we started, we used Fastcase. And what that is that is a free resource that's made available by the Florida Bar. Another low cost or no cost option is if you have a local law library near you, which I have the fortune of having. That's another possibility where you're not having to pay the high monthly fees. And that's how we really addressed the legal research in the beginning, before we had the financial capability to commit ourselves to a subscription. When we did that research and made the decision on who we were going to go with, one thing to point out is we were able to get a good discount because we were a new firm. So some of the research companies are willing to negotiate and may offer deep discounts on the monthly subscription cost if you're a new firm within the beginning stages. A couple takeaways on technology that I would say I wish I would have known when I started is invest in a technology professional securing your systems. This is actually something I knew to do because part of my business practice is cybersecurity. Set up two-factor authentication for whatever operating system you're using. So for example, Microsoft Office 365, if you have that, make sure you have two-factor authentication enabled. You're also going to want two-factor for anyone logging in to your operating or your trust account. And I do want to take a moment to make mention of, there is another speaker series video with LegalFuel CLE that focuses just on technology and cybersecurity. So if it's not an area that you're familiar with, I would 100% recommend that you watch that, because lawyers, if you watch the news or read things in the Bar Journal or just in the newspaper, we are prime targets for cybercrime, not just your clients, but you. So I would also recommend that when you're able, look into not just malpractice insurance, but cyber insurance. Lastly, from a cybersecurity standpoint, I would recommend using a good password manager. And I think just generally people get into a really bad habit of reusing the same password over and over, or they write them down on a Word document and keep them on the computer or put them on a Post-it. As soon as we had staff, that was a process that we implemented for our firm. Everyone has a password manager. We particularly use LastPass. There are a lot of other options. And any passwords for e-filing, bank accounts, all those sorts of things are very long and complex, and they're stored in the password manager. So that's something that I would recommend. Now that we've talked about the major topics such as finding an office, choosing your entity structure, hiring staff, what I'd like to do is close with some key takeaways from my personal experience in starting a law firm. So number one, and I think this is most important, is there's no real downtime in starting and owning a business. And that's a lesson that I've learned over the past year. And you absolutely have to make your health and wellness a priority. And I know the Florida Bar has really taken a focus on this lately, and it's unfortunate because lawyers as a profession, it's very stressful, it's very adversarial at times, and a lot of us don't take mental health and wellness seriously. But you have to prioritize it because no one else will. Number two, lean and mean. Keep your overhead as low as you can for as long as you can, because starting a firm is like buying a house. You never realize how much stuff you need until it happens. And in line with that, don't get yourself into debt if you can avoid it. Number three, and this is a hard lesson to learn, because when you open a firm, you just want to bring in the business and make it successful and make money. But you have to know that not all clients are created equal, and not all clients are good clients, and not all money is good money. So know who your ideal client is, make sure that's who you're working with, and if you get that little feeling in your gut that a client potentially is going to be a problem or is not a good fit, make sure that you listen to that, because I think you'll save yourself a lot of heartache down the road. Number four, don't let your ambition to have a crazy successful firm and generate new business steer you into an unknown area of law if you don't have somebody that you can associate with for a matter. I've seen some lawyers very obviously get into practice areas that they don't have experience with, and then the problem becomes you have an ethical obligation to be competent in that practice area if you're going to take a client or a matter on. So if you're going to veer into practice areas that you're not familiar with, make sure that you have someone that you know that you can co-counsel with to make sure that you are fulfilling your ethical duties to the client and help you learn. Number five, get involved at the local and state bar levels or with civic and charitable organizations. Make a name for yourself. Do something good for the community and make connections, because even though there are over 100,000 lawyers in the state of Florida, most of us know what a small community it really is. So involvement is key. Number six, guard your reputation, because it only takes one circumstance to make you lose your reputation. And it goes back to, it's a very small community. People talk, lawyers talk, judges talk, so your reputation is critical. Seven, create processes, including a client intake process, and automate whatever you can, because that will give you the ability to scale your firm as you grow. And number eight, I think this is super important, particularly for people in certain practice areas, is from the beginning, and it'll be hard when you're so busy, but build an organized repository of documents or templates that you're able to repurpose. And I'm not saying it's always going to be a one-size-fits-all thing, because I'll tell you, with the business litigation that I do, every case is different. But as you're working on certain cases or even transactional matters, make sure you're keeping an organized repository of that so you have something to go back to, and it'll make your life a lot easier and your work more efficient. I'm Valerie Barnhart of Pereira Barnhart. I hope that this CLE has been helpful for you, and I will tell you, if you're thinking about it, seriously, make the jump, because I remember when I did it and I was so scared, and my husband said to me, Val, the only thing you're going to regret is that you didn't do it sooner, and that's so true. So good luck on your journey, and I hope this has been helpful.
LegalFuel connects Florida bar members with strategic tools designed to help you fuel your law practice with increased efficiencies and profitability. Whether you want to launch a new firm, better market your services, or strengthen your internal operations, LegalFuel provides attorneys with the resources you need to run your business smarter and more efficiently. Visit LegalFuel.com today to help manage your practice and fuel your business.